My name's Tim Dunn, as you know, and I look after mobile marketing for MIG. I'm the second loudest man in MIG. Unlike David, I am quite interested in technology. What that says about my sex life is a matter for debate. Not too much debate. Let's move on. I've been asked to have a look at the future a little bit. I think about the future probably far more than is healthy for a grown man with little interest in sci-fi. It pays, of course, to have a quick look at the potted history of mobile as it's developed so far. I'm not going to kind of show you pictures of car-sized phones or anything like that. But to kind of get to where we are, 1G phones launched in the 80s. They were analog signals. They were rubbish. It was quite easy to hack into them. There was very little national coverage. 2G is when phones essentially went digital. Primitive data services started to get set up. And 3G is really where we are now, and for the next couple of years. So we're in a period of some consolidation from a network and from a data perspective. What we are seeing, which will be trends for the future, is voice is really just a part of the mix, and data is kind of getting more and more important. Users used to view their phones to do this. I think we're all pretty confident with that. But now, as we kind of getting more and more kind of data services running through, the mobile is more used to do this. This is kind of I'm just using this as a preamble for the kind of services that we're going to talk about and for the direction that we're moving in for all of this. So what does this mean firstly for the network operators? So whatever I say, I'm going to upset somebody, so I'll just kind of say what I think. Firstly, the reach for brands. And for third-party services into a user has thus far been constrained by the network operator content portal through the filter of a proprietary operating system on a device. So I think most of us are probably relatively familiar with these terms. So the operator content portal is O2 Active, Voda Live, Orange World, and so on. The proprietary operating system is the software that sits on your device and runs it. Up until relatively recently, that's been very flat, very primitive bits of software which do very little more than open the phone and make a phone call. However, users are now more demanding. With the embedding of the digital world into our daily experience, they are now much more agnostic about how they do stuff. All they want to do is to get to the four things which really motivate you and are really part of your digital life. So that's connecting with your friends, finding out stuff, having some fun, and looking for stuff. You can characterize and kind of slice and dice digital behavior any way you like, but this kind of works for me. So the primary content providers are now the true internet, social networks, media owners, app stores, and search. Again, you can kind of characterize these any way you like. And what's the most efficient way and what's the best way for the users to experience these kinds of content providers? It's through enhanced and through better mobile devices. But the key point, the key kind of development which is helping people to get to it is the new generation of operating systems which are living on the phones. For anyone who's kind of uses smartphones, hands up who does have a smartphone or has a phone they would define as smart. Almost everyone. So that's pretty telling, even though we are a bunch of media geeks in London. So the operating system is going to be the key. So anyone who's kind of even remotely conversant with the scene will know that the main players in this are Apple's iPhone, Google's Android, Nokia's Symbian, and a few other bits and pieces around the edge of that. So my prediction for the smartphone future divides into essentially three categories, and this is my opinion, so you can kind of take it or leave it. Other analysts will kind of argue with me. I believe that young users will be the absolute driver for this market. The reason, you look at their high digital consumption, these are the people that Steve was referring to earlier on who touch digital platforms 48 times a day or whatever it is. At the moment, the young users who are primarily on pay-as-you-go are finding that the price tariffs are relatively high to buy a smartphone. However, if you look, so I did a quick look at the Orange store yesterday, and I did a quick look through the pay-as-you-go section, about a third of the devices on the Orange pay-as-you-go range are now smartphones. However, and I define a smartphone as being essentially touchscreen, 3G, potentially Wi-Fi, an operating system that can support apps. So the sales that the operators are trying to make are essentially smartphone-based for all demographics. If you look at the post-pay market, the situation is reversed, where about 60 to 65% of the phones on the range are smartphones. So the youth being the most connected to these digital platforms is where I'm going to stick my neck out and say that pretty much all young people under 25, by a couple of years' time, are going to be smartphone customers. There will always be a very, very low demographic who are not going to get there, but I think the vast majority will do. When we're looking at the essentially digital adults, this is where, as we've seen kind of here, this is where the vast majority of smartphone ownership already is. And again, I see this market going up to a similar proportion as people get more and more used to expecting to have these digital services on their phones. The only place where we're going to not see very much in the next 2 years, I'd say, would be in the very much older demographics. And the reason isn't that they find, well, they do of course find, fiddly little phones, talk to your mum, fiddly, difficult, and slightly pointless, but they're not engaged with the digital content which makes a smartphone essential. So what is the key driver for the next generation of smartphones? So if you talk to Microsoft, and this is Microsoft's new operating system, Windows Phone Series 7, I think you have to call it, or they get cross at you. It has to be something which has all these things. Firstly, people are expecting a layer of service, an aesthetic function, which is way beyond what we have now. When we're looking at the iPhone and the huge range of imitators of iPhone, it's all about apps in a row. So you close one app, you open the next. This is potentially a marker for a new generation of phones which places data at the centre of the user experience. So if I want to look up Steve or Mark, I click one button and I can see not just Mark and his phone number and his email and a picture of him, what he's doing on Facebook and Twitter, when I last met him, when I'm going to meet him. All of these things become much more user-centred. It has to integrate these data pieces into a central point so that you don't have 20 different hubs of content on your phone. So anyone who has an iPhone will know that you're scrolling backwards and forwards and finding this and that. So an integrated approach to data, making the data which is available into a way which is much more friendly to the user. It has to be expressive. So with iPhone, you're not expressing who Tim Dunn is or who Mark Brill is. You're telling who Steve Jobs is, which is kind of not necessarily what you may want to achieve. And of course, these devices must be fast. Everything has to be at your fingertips to create something which is telling and will be yours. So, as you've probably heard, I keep using the word data over and over and over again. A phone is essentially no longer a voice device. If you talk to any of the network operators, I'm not sure how official they are about this in the open, but the capability of making voice calls will, in my view, become secondary and by some distance to becoming a data network over the next 5-10 years. So what does this mean for the future? What does it mean the developments are going to be? So I've seen the future, and the future is in Slough. So when you say you have to look west to find the future, you don't need to look that much further. So it's certainly not as far as Silicon Valley. What is going on in Slough, which is so important? So Slough is the place